bipai na tunanani esikali kama ekouta na koyeba te bafami nanga bapesanga mokombo na libala oyo bawela ebaleka kaka bango baza kofinganga bayebi bango moko likambo baluka na nzoto oyo mpe bayebi bango moko ntina batikaka mobali oyo silisa maloba na maloba pona muroyo ngai pe nakoleka na yebi nyonso bozali kobanza badondo mingi baleka awa batika sesango boyebaka na betakili bakulokola pe baninga bozela mokolo bakotikanga bosala peti
Greeting to you all. My name is Mahdi Omar. This is the African Television Network of New England. Political leaders in Africa and Europe, including United Nations General Secretary Antonio Guterres and African Union Commission Chairperson Moussa Faki, have condemned the slave trade in Libya. Refugee and African immigrants are routinely exposed to human rights violations committed by Libyan officials and security forces and abuse at the hand of armed groups and criminal gangs who are often working in close cooperation to mutual financial advantage. After years of failing diplomacy, it seems that the world is finally talking about the human tragedy in Libya. Although this new wave of attention are welcomed, but it does raise a key question that why did it took so long to have this unified voice of condemnation? Why now, not yesterday? And most importantly, what does this delayed reaction say about race and racism in international humanitarian work? To talk about this issue in detail, I have three guests here in our studio with me. They are Rahman Oldagebolu, Shiro Nincha, and Teresa James. Rahman Oldagebolu is Boston-based filmmaker who moved to the United States about 17 years ago, armed with a dream to learn filmmaking. He started out as a production assistant on movies and television shows around Boston and has worked to direct and co-produce a few short movies. Educated at Harvard University and Quincy College, Rahman's film won Boston's prestigious Best Emerging Filmmaker Award at the Roxbury International Film Festival and the 2010 Artist Award at the American Islamic Congress, a multicultural and interfaith organization headquartered in Washington, D.C., and a few other awards as well. Shira obtained his first bachelor degree in economics from University of South Africa and his second degree in accounting from Salem State University, and he is the co-founder of African Center for Fraud Prevention. His work interests are forensic accounting and editing. Teresa James obtained a graduate degree in education and leadership from Rhodes College and Grand Canyon University, respectively, and a graduate certificate in evidence-based coaching, Fielding Graduate University, and Conflict Resolution University of Massachusetts, Boston. Ms. James is currently working on her doctorate in psychology with a concentration in consciousness, spirituality, and integrative health at Saybrook University. Mrs. James also provides coaching service to undergraduate students in Babson College, Wellesley, Massachusetts. Welcome to our studio, my fantastic friends.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you really for coming here, for accepting my invitation to discuss about the horrific slave trade in Libya. Of course, your hard work is not in vain. The urgent evacuation of refugees from Libya are underway as we speak. I think between 75 to 80 children and women already arrived in Niger. So it's not spectacular, but it's a good thing. Kudos to African in Boston for organizing this march. Tell us a little bit about the marching, who was there, who was not, how was the response from the public, and all of that. Gino, let's start.
Well, the march, thanks Mr. Orma for inviting us to your studio. It's such an honor to be a part of this show. We're delighted, we are happy. The march was a great march. We came out, it was very, very diverse. We had almost everyone, not just Africans, we also had Americans, and we had Europeans involved. So it was huge. It shows that everyone condemns slavery. It's something that is universally unaccepted. And we did create the awareness that is needed in terms of Massachusetts, and we did remind our government officials to add their voice to this and say no to such a barbaric act that is being orchestrated in Libya.
Rahman.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us. We're very grateful for the opportunity to be able to talk about this problem that's been really eating at every one of us. And the march, you know, when I heard about what happened there, and it's just unfathomable degree of inhumanity for someone to hold some human beings like yourself and sell them off as slaves. I couldn't really imagine the immensity of that crime, but to think of all the other forces that make that possible, from what's sending these people out from their country, pursuing something to make their lives better, to help their families back at home, struggling to move out. You look at all those forces from there, and then to see the European powers kind of like trying to make this easy for those who are going to capture these vulnerable people. Yeah. So I just feel like I don't know how to first frame everything. So I'm glad when I heard about the march that we had several meetings over the past few weeks, and we decided to come out and let people know what's going on, and to take steps, proper steps in being able to make sure that this doesn't go on, and that we are able to get all the people that are there all back home free and safe. And everyone on the committee has been very wonderful. Everyone worked very hard. It was almost something that you couldn't imagine in a very short time. People grabbed everything they could, and they made it happen. I got there this morning and seeing the whole crowd, and all over the Boston Common, people who are there who have not even heard about it, surprised to see what's going on, and they all came join us and sign in their names to support what we are doing, and so that's an amazing thing. And so we're, for that as a first step, we are very happy.
So African in Boston led this march, isn't it? They are the one who organized the march.
Yes,
sponsored it. That's good.
Just in agreement with my fellow panelists. I'm also working with AIB, Sila Institute. We came together to do a small project, and then we received this call to action. And like everyone else who thinks about slavery as some antiquated experience, and we now know and have known for quite some time that Black Africans have been being enslaved as they are moving away from their homes of origin and trying to seek a better life for themselves and for their children, and finding themselves caught up in the slave trade. And I will speak that it's not just black Africans, it is a global issue. Human trafficking has been realized and has been allowed to exist and fester in civilizations across the globe because it's profitable. And people who are in power, leadership positions, are also quite aware of what is going on, but no one seems to be able to say no to the money. And so we are trying to engage politicians and other business leaders, civic leaders, to try to partner with them for a long-term strategy that would reduce the numbers of young people, mothers and children and husbands and brothers, fathers, from leaving their countries of origin, and try to think creatively of how we can create different kinds of economies in nations that are poor, that are vulnerable, and to see in the 21st century whether or not we can, with our creative human talents, begin to redirect people, helping them to stay in their homes so they don't have to face some of the more barbaric parts of human nature and be sold into slavery. It's an abysmal situation as people, again, shifting their homelands all over the globe to try to find peace for themselves and for their families, try to find economically something more stable, and just trying to be cooperative and collaborative as we all here on this panel and others desire to be so. And so today was the call to action.
It was good.
And the march was first shot across the bow, as it were, to say no to slavery.
Yeah, it's great. It's all over the world, actually, in Toronto, South Africa, London, in Paris was really, really very huge. So it paid off, actually. It looks very good now. We don't expect a miracle, but at least it's a better condition at the moment. Chiro, Rahman, I'm sure for most Africans, the recent footage about African for sale in Libya was not really for me a breaking news. It's not. The Guardian reported in April of this year. Reuters also reported it in May that Africans were being sold. For me, the most amazing and laughable thing is that Mr. Antonio Guterres, UN General Secretary, came out and said he was absolutely shocked. The European Union claimed they were mortified. Really? You kidding me? You didn't know this? The silence is amazing. Why the silence?
I believe that there are so many wealthy people who are political and politically connected to those who are elected officials or dictators. It doesn't matter. This is a profitable business. It is a global business. It cannot exist without the cooperation of government. It cannot exist without wealthy people knowing that it exists. They reap great profits from the sale and use of slaves.
Amazing.
And yes, it is the 21st century, but money has not gone out of style. Neither has greed, and neither has authoritarian mindsets. People relish in abusing some of them, others who are less fortunate. we're in this situation globally because people, however few and however ignorant they may be, they have a stake in this ancient commerce. It has not gone away. The fact that the European Union is quiet or the Secretary General of the UN is shocked suggests that they're ignorant to me, and that they perhaps maybe not should be the people in power.
They know that.
Because they are quite aware of what is going on, and we are aware that they have not attacked the programs that support, or the nations that support slavery, in a way that would unify our humanistic endeavors on this planet.
Rahman.
I think you're right, to say why the silence and why the display of surprise at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been going on for a long time, and we know that. And it's not like a lot of people out there, out here in the West also aren't aware. Even in 2010, I was in Los Angeles for a film festival, because my first film that I took there, and I came across a film that made by some producers from Australia. They went to 2010.
10.
That's so it was in 2010 that we had this festival. So you can imagine that the film started probably at least about 2 years earlier.
That's left, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they were in Western Sahara to make a completely different project. But what they found, have been there for a long time, what they discovered was that most of the black people that were there in Western Sahara were actually owned by the Arabs that were there in the same place.
Yeah.
But when you're just a casual tourist there, you wouldn't be able to tell. So I was so stunned, and to the point that I almost couldn't continue promoting my own film. I had to jump on the bandwagon for this film. I brought a copy here, and I've been talking about it since.
Yeah.
But you never hear any resonance from what you're saying until now that something like that happened and it's captured on CNN. That's when it now becomes. And I have a friend here in Boston. He's from Mauritania. And he wrote articles that was published all over, even in the Financial Times, about slavery in Mauritania. And so all of these things have been going on, and you wonder why haven't anyone really been able to do anything about it so until now that we're feeling shocked. And it's this shock, I think, is also just for the cameras and all that. It's all going to go away afterwards. So I think the core of this thing, we don't always touch upon it. It's a kind of like disrespect that people have for black Africans, black people all over the world. We don't always like to talk about it because we want to just kind of like do what we want to do. Or for like us as African immigrants, when we come here, we just think we have a problem where we're coming into the United States, to the West, and we want to struggle and accomplish whatever we want to do. But that is not the way things go. In America, the black people that are in America, how have they been treated before we get here? So we come here and learn, even though we've been hearing about what the problem is in America, but we don't really feel it until you really get here. And then you start to go from here to what's happening in Europe, what's happening in many countries, in China, in India, all over the places. And you see this disrespect of black people that people have, that it's almost like they don't see you as a human being, and it makes it easy for them to want to say you want to sell a black person to be a slave somewhere. And when you look at it, you realize that this is where the problem is, that we really need to focus. Yes, I believe in education, that we have to educate people well enough, but sometimes, it's just so appalling that you don't even know where to begin with this kind of education, And I think, this is what we need to pay attention to. It's terrible.
Chiro, the European Union, particularly the Italian government, trained and financed this Coast Guard, logistic and financial support, literally tell them, take care of them. It is not in writing, but simply listen, I don't need this Negro to come to my shore.
Yeah.
Keep them away from me. Kill them if you have to. Rape them if you must, but keep them.
Keep them.
It's obvious.
Yeah.
Chiro.
Well, you know, this is a tragedy. This is so sad. I can just imagine what these people have gone through or still going through. And to sit here and say the European Union wasn't aware of this is just a fallacy of composition, because the United Kingdom decided to vote to exit the European Union, the BRICS, because they said these people were coming to take their jobs. It was immigrants. The condition, one of the major conditions was that immigrants were coming in to take their jobs.
Yeah.
And who are these immigrants to begin with? I am not going to question that, because of course we know the immigrants, they just needed a strategy to close their borders, to properly monitor their system. So that they were political in that statement. But that is to show you that they understand the problem. They know what the problem is, but they do not care about the problem because it doesn't affect their citizens, or probably their citizens benefit or are not benefiting from it. Yeah. If it was a British citizen or British citizens involved in this or being victims of this would have been on mainstream media. The world would have been singing it. CNN would have been broadcasting it. But because it's not them, they just pass it. It just passes on the news like briefly. It's not the main topic of discussion. But these are lives of women, these are lives of children. The United Nations, by itself, by virtue of itself, has just been a failure. This is a failure of the United Nations, and they are ashamed. They should be ashamed of themselves for such an institution to be alive in the 21st century, an institution which core values are to promote human rights, fundamental values, the right of a female child, the right of children to be alive and kicking, and see such a disaster orchestrated in Libya is just a disgrace. Yeah. And if we have to talk, and the funniest thing about this is that it just doesn't only affect Africa. Yeah. For African leaders, I'm going to tell them that this is a disgrace on their end. It has exposed their tyranny. It has exposed their lack of leadership. Yeah. They should be ashamed of themselves.
Of course.
But all hope is not lost on them. I think this is a time for them to realize certain things and come up together as one and address this issue so that the world can be a better place. And I also would like to say that it's not lost on us. The United Nations still have a role, still have a chance, but the first step is to condemn. And also why the Italian government was busy funding the Libyan Coast Guard to take care of this thing, it makes me question this issue of foreign aid. Because what is foreign aid? What is foreign aid all about? And this still brings alive the topic of, does Africa really need foreign aid? Because because they're giving this money to the Libyan government in form of aid, but the aid is just there to kill and destroy and prevent people from entering Europe. The aid is not there to create jobs, to better the lives of citizens.
A safeguard.
Now, why people might agree that this is important in the short run, if the government had genuine reasons to do that, they would have looked for strategies that would benefit the citizens or prevent this in the long run, such as promoting trainings that would create jobs in Africa and other programs that would better prevent people. We all know if the United States did not have the rules and the regulations, if it did not have the systems that it has today, a lot of Americans would be running away from this country. We would be either in Canada or somewhere else because it's our right to enjoy fundamental values, core values of the life to live in a peaceful environment, the life of freedom, the right to freedom of expression, freedom of speech. But when we live in a society that we cannot get those rights, those fundamental basic human rights, then we are forced to leave. According to a report by Transparency International, 50 million people in sub-Saharan Africa have to pay a bribe for basic services. This includes food, shelter, water. These are basic services, education. Yeah. You know, and when no one talks about these things and when no one addresses these things, what do you expect?
Yeah.
So it is important that while we condemn this horrific act, we should also look at ways that we can better help these people so that they can be able to live a decent life.
Yeah, I have that question later. But, you know, I studied political science, by the way, UMass Boston. And I could have advised the State Department not to go to Libya. Had it not been for the toppling of Gaddafi, this would not have happened. They went there willy-nilly, toppled this regime, dismantled the state apparatus, and say, bye-bye. Look the outcome. How irresponsible. What happened in Libya today would affect globally all of us.
Well, why I agree with you on that, I hold some reservation on that because a dictator should be taken off. I have no doubt with that. But I think prior to Gaddafi, let's get history right. Prior to Gaddafi being eliminated, this thing was already going on.
So with a limited, I know.
Well, it was Libya was just not the hotspot, but there were other routes. Remember, these people have, these traffickers are looking for routes to Europe. They take people, they look for areas where there are no proper systems in place, structures are weak. They identify weak structures, and we know that a lot of societies in Africa have weak structures. Yeah. So they make use of those weak structures, and they take these people to Europe. Yeah. So Libya, it's a hot spot because it's very vulnerable at the moment, but the State Department is also aware of what is going on, because when the FBI, the Financial Intelligence Unit, they see the flow of money. They have those areas. They have a red flag zone, and they observe these things. They know what is going on. It's like Transparency International would report how much money is stolen from Africa, embezzled in Africa, but when that money exits Africa, they stop reporting. So the question here is not about Gaddafi. Yeah, I agree with you
but,
that Gaddafi
on that, just let me. I don't mean to say Gaddafi was a good president or a good man, but who benefited from that tragedy? The Libyans are not. Their country is totally destroyed. The Africans butchered, as you can see. Even the Europeans now are not benefited from that action. In that sense, it is much better to keep that dictator stay in power than totally destroying it. That was my point. I didn't mean to say Mugabe was a good man or Gaddafi was a good man. They have to go.
I'm glad that you mentioned that, because yes, to say that if it wasn't for the invasion of Libya, that we wouldn't have this, and that's true. And to say that to think that this was not going on even before the invasion is also kind of like to be deceiving oneself. And I also agree the fact that when we don't need dictators heading governments anywhere at all in the world anymore. And even those who are not direct dictators like Gaddafi, even the elected people across Africa today, what are they doing? Pretty much, they're not doing anything to prevent all of these things. No. Nigeria, we've returned to democracy since, I think, 1999, that we've returned to democracy. And it's been democracy since, and yet things just keep going south. The responsibilities that we have there is strong, that we need to focus on that. But at the same time, we're within a global structure that there is no way that you can actually isolate yourself completely. And then you have a global structure, a system that's interested in what you have in Africa, not in you as Africans, and how they're going to get whatever is they have there is what's more important. So that's why I think, we need to really have this conversation to put on the table and respect one another as human beings, and know that whatever you're looking for is, what we are also looking for, and we have to negotiate. And there's no problem, I think, in being able to carry all these things through. You mentioned how Libya is actually not even benefiting the Europeans right now, which is true. And that's one of the things that everyone needs to realize, that when you hold someone down, or a group of people or anything, and you think because you are getting some little thing, that's actually even worse, because there is a loss, a great loss, that these people are having. But it's not just the people that you're holding down. The whole world is experiencing this loss.
Yeah.
And look in America, the way you have in America, the way the system is kind of like fractured and all of that, and you think just a group of people are developing, growing, doing better. No, there is a huge amount of loss that is on all of us, all over, and including people all over the world.
Yeah.
And when you look at to see where these problems are, that the global systems need to be restructured. I know that the United Nations has not been strong enough to take care of all of this, but the United Nations still seems to be almost like the best institution that we got right now globally. Yeah. AU is the one we got within Africa. But when you look at the conversation about the state of the world, the problem of globalization now, last year, they voted for Brexit in the UK. What was the problem that everyone was talking about in the news that was responsible? Poor white men who were who were losing their jobs to immigrants. Here in the United States, same time, November last year, we voted Trump in. And what was the problem? Because we all know that it's a disaster having someone like that as a president. What's the problem that they are referring to? The issue of globalization, taking jobs from poor white folks in remote regions. What about the black people in America as well? Have you looked at how the globalization is affecting them? What about the black people in Africa, the people who are doing all these jobs that you are benefiting from? What about their lives? No one is looking at things from their perspective to be able to try to rectify, to find a solution. Here in the United States, in Europe, and the entire international, but no one is looking at one another in the eyes as human beings to be able to do things. Look at China. China's movement into Africa has been strictly contractual business. Yep. I give you this, you give me that. But it's not been like that in practice. Yeah. It's all been that China is getting a lot of stuff. Yeah, people are getting jobs, but what kind of jobs? How much dignity is in that kind of jobs that they're getting? It's just recently when things are going really bad in South Sudan that China is just being able to come up with some aids and stuff. And we all know, all over the continent, we know what AIDS has done to people. So I think globally we need to really have a strong conversation on all of this and look at one another as equal in the eye and not to look down on anybody. I think that's where the problem is. When we start to handle things that way, then that's the beginning of really growth for every one of us. But until then, things won't be that easy.
I would agree. When globalization, these various global trade agreements were passed, I don't think there was a deep dive at the UN level or even within certain countries to really begin to understand the shifting, this new paradigm that was coming and how it was going to affect not only just the changes in people's lives, but it has also changed our climate. Mm-hmm. It has changed the way we procure our natural resources. It has changed the way people are relating one to another. It has created a lot of false realities. People were promised a better life and people were promised more jobs. But when they were speaking of these things, if the United States was the template and we were going to pay people $15, $25 an hour, that was not the truth. The truth of the matter is that our businesses, our corporations here in the United States and around Europe recognized a couple of things. One, the population was aging. They needed to be able to have a workforce somewhere where they could reap profits and not pay people as much. You go to lands where people are not as well educated, where there is maybe some dictatorial type of government, but their systems are not necessarily in place like we have them in the United States. We exported our profitability to other countries so that the United States and Europe could age comfortably, make more money on the backs of poorer people. And in terms of China, China has expanded, but it needs a certain kind of natural resources, and where are they going to get it? Everyone comes to Africa. Yeah. Africa is shrinking in terms of its land mass, in terms of its being able to produce and sustain its own people. And these old kinds of relationships, as I will, put something in your hand if you turn your back, and rape, literally, the land and the people for a dollar bill or whatever the currency is in the country. Wealthy people, because of who they are and what it is that drives them, so often these corporations have to pay to their shareholders a profit. Every year we're looking for profits. Nobody is stopping, for instance, a CEO in the United States from making $500 to $2,000 more than the lowest paid person in their corporation. So there is a mindset that has taken hold. We call it globalization because we don't know what else to really call it. But it's more, for me, like cannibalization. Yeah. We are pulling nations and people apart from one another. And then if it's so that old white men can survive, then we need to reframe that conversation and help old white men to share what it is that they believe that they are entitled to.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Sorry, wanted not to jump in, but as she was talking about the relationship, so something happened when Trump met with African leaders not long ago here, that the first thing that he said, which was really interesting, but most people don't look at it in the way that, to see it from the right perspective. He says, oh, I love Africa. My friends go there to get rich, So that alone tells you, how people look at Africa. Yeah. Go there to get rich. Yeah. And it's been like that for a long time. Before South Sudanese, before they got their independence, there were people from Wall Street who were there ready to kind of like jump and buy up places and make money for themselves. So these things are going on. There are no regulations to really be able to create a level playing field for people to work.
Yeah. The Ghanaian president recently, we are, he said, the richest beggar in the world, he said. We have everything, but it's still beg from the West. Yeah. But this is very painful to me, almost depressing, really. 30 years ago, as a young man, I abandoned my homeland, Ethiopia, because of instability, and lived as a refugee in the Republic of Djibouti. There is nothing glamorous, there is nothing sexy about being a refugee. It was humiliating. It is because of the American resettlement program that I came to this country. I am very grateful. 30 years later, not only my children are abandoning our continent. It is sickening, my friend. There must be a better way of running our continent. I mean, if Korea made it, Singapore made it without any natural resource. Nigeria, look at you, my friend, the richest place on the face of the Cameroon. And our children are living and begging in the West, my friend. What is wrong with that? What happened to us?
Oh, Mr. Omar, this is sad.
Very sad.
It's really sad because Africa is losing the brightest. It's losing the scientists, those that could bring the medication, the treatment that will cure cancer. And what is so funny about it, what makes it even worse is the fact that when these migrants, like you and I, succeed in going through this harsh, difficult journey and ends up, say, in the United States or in Europe, no one addresses that cancer of corruption that they have been victims of. No one addresses that post-traumatic stress, that PTSD of corruption that they have been subject to. But the system expects them to adapt, live the American dream and survive without knowing actually what these people have been through, which is not only a failure, in these settings, but it's also a problem. Because these people, we do a great job. When I came into this country, no one addressed these issues. All they expected me was to speak like an American, which I did so well, go to school, the American dream. No one cared if I was at school or not. But I did a great job and I survived. You know, these people go through a lot. And 50 years after independence of Africa, statisticians and romantic economists say Africa is growing. Some say at 2%, others say at 4%. The truth of the matter is that Africa is stagnated. Africa is suffering from schizophrenia.
Yeah.
Africa doesn't know herself.
Yeah.
You know, when Kwame Nkrumah was alive, things like this he would not even sit back and watch tragedies like this occur in the continent.
Yeah.
We remember when French colonies were given the option for independence. When one chose for outright independence, and when France did what it did, you remember how he reacted. That was when the formation of the African Union at the time. And today, we sit and watch what is happening, and no one, African Union, they haven't really talked about it. You were even talking about the United Nations, the EU. I mean, let's ask ourselves, African Union, you and I live in the United States. You and I we look at opportunities here that we can make it. The world is a business. And the truth is, everyone is out to minimize costs and maximize profit, regardless of where they are. You are there, you are here looking for opportunities, and if you see an opportunity, you will try to maximize that opportunity, to capitalize on the opportunity. That is how business people, the West, whoever would capitalize. But it is important that African leaders, Africans, head of states, those entrusted with positions of governance, to take the lead in closing the gaps, the loopholes that exist in the systems. Because only when African head of states, decide to close the loopholes, then can we stop talking about exploitation. And I'm not going to blame anyone on this. I would blame African leaders.
Of course.
Because we need to, remember, prior to independence, Africa, the West had built porous institutions in Africa to govern from Europe. They didn't need to sit in Africa governing. When Africa became independent, our leaders kept those porous institutions. One, that was one of the terms of the independence. Two, it benefited them. It was a platform for them to embezzle. But till date, they have not been able to transform those porous institutions and create better institutions. And also, when you look at the demographic of Africa, you have 20% older people and 80% youths. But when you look at the representation in the government, it's the opposite. You have 80% of older people, older generation, people who became ministers not by virtue of merit, but by political allies to the regime, as opposed to educational know-how. The youths are not involved in the transformation process. As a result, they have skills. For African youths to leave Africa, search for routes to get to Europe through whichever means, it's because they have an idea. And that idea can be transformed into a creativity that would yield results, that would make Africa a place to be. But until Africans decide to take that first step, an African head of states, because institutions need to be created, structures need to be put in place. You know, when you go to a dinner table and one party is dependent to the independent variable, then there cannot be dialogue. But until both parties become independent, then can we sit on a dinner table and have an honest conversation. But when as long as one is dependent on the other, then that conversation would never happen. It's either take it or leave it. And Africans need to create that platform where they can be able to dialogue with whichever country on a free and fair basis. Africa need to train her citizens, give them the skills that they need, so that when European investors come in and create companies, they can have the skills to work there. Look at what is happening in China. The Chinese government did a great job in empowering Chinese students, citizens. As a result, when American investors go to China and create companies, even those that live in the United States, when they kind of take their companies into China, they don't need to hire Americans and pay them high money, because they know that the Chinese government has done a great job in empowering Chinese citizens so that they can be productive and effective, efficient at a very low cost. So African governments need to restructure, need to think about the type of education that they give to their citizens. Because only when they give them the right, you don't need to negotiate. And also, one of the reasons why Africans leave They don't leave because the United States is better. There is unemployment in the United States. People sleep on the streets in the United States. One of the problem is, in the United States, when you pay for your electricity bill, you get light. When you pay for water, you get water. But in Africa, when you pay for electricity bill, you don't get electricity. When you pay for water, you don't get water. So those are the reasons. Yeah. So sitting there and talking about bringing African skills, Africans back to Africa without addressing the core reasons why they migrated is a mistake. The first step is to address the issues that face Africa. And African leaders need to understand the basic issues. And the funniest thing about it is that these companies that own this electricity and all of this water, they are not African companies. They are European companies. Yeah. They are American companies. Yeah. But they are not held up to the standard. In America, you cannot switch off electricity like that. But in Africa, you can do whatever you want, when you want. So we need to have this conversation.
Sure. Rahman, go ahead, Tracy. I will ask you later. Go ahead.
Well, what I was, again, agreeing, Africa has been so occupied and controlled, mental models, political models, all kinds of human existent models, and I hate to say, but even like puppetry models to the Europeans, and willingly for whatever the exchange is, devaluing who Africans are, and allowing, even though with independence, allowing this coexistence of a subversive system to remain because the natural resources are cheap to extract. There are not that many people who are going to say no to a major European global company coming in and want to extract the oil. And so when, again, the leaders themselves in Africa are sort of part and parcel in alignment with this kind of behavior, their first priority is not to the people. It is to enrich themselves. And this is what we're saying, is that we now know it's a ruse. Now that people are shifting and moving, the climate is changing, resources are at a premium, the global population is exploding to the place where we won't be able to sustain ourselves. And young people, because they're young, their whole role is to create. It is to ideate. It is to want better than what their parents have had. They want to, it's an impulse that you cannot stop. And so if you don't help them to redirect their energies, their creativity back into their own lands, then they will move and shift other people just by virtue of their youth and their numbers out of their positions. This, I think, is an underpinning for why Eurocentric people are so, off their own balance. Yes, Europeans and Americans, they're aging. This is an aging population. People in Africa, people in the Middle East, people in China are much younger. And other countries have done a better job with recognizing the demographics and the problems that occur with young people. Africa needs to begin to think more systemically to create those structures, that infrastructure, where their people can be proud of their leaders and not ashamed, can boast of their goodness and not have to hide their faces because they perpetuate deep evils, including slavery, around the globe.
Rahman, you are from Nigeria. I don't have to tell you how rich Nigeria is. Angola, Ghana discover oil, Uganda, Niger, Cameroon, Libya, Algeria, to mention a few. What is going on? Don't you think that we should do better? We don't have too much time. We have only 5 minutes.
No, I agree with you that, yes, one questions that again and again, and for many years it doesn't seem like it's been changing. So, and like he said, the leaders, and they will have to do better and all of that, but which is what we need for the leaders to be able to do right by the citizens. But I don't know if I have faith in those leaders right now.
I don't either.
Because again and again, and the way the system has become, for example, in Nigeria right now, to be rich, the quickest thing to become rich in Nigeria is to be a politician.
Yes.
You know, so if everyone wants to go into government, become a politician, who will do the rest of the things that a country needs to do and all of that? So, and it's because of how much money is going into all of these things. People have been complaining how much they're paying senators and things like that. So it makes me not really have much hope in the leaders. But in the people, yes, we, as he mentioned, the statistics that show that 80% of Africans are you know, young men and women that are very active and intelligent. I mean, to be able to do a lot of, when I go to Nigeria, sometimes some of the equipments that I use here that I can't get to really fix, that if you send it back to the company, they'll just send you a new one. You take it to Nigeria, right on the side of the street, they'll fix it right there. And, you know, so all this energy is there that I think we have to, which is why I believe so much in education. Any hope that that kind of like sustains me, myself, is in education, being able to go and make sure that people understand the way the structure of the world is, and for them to really take lives into their own hands. And from also education here for people to really have a better attitude, to understand. Because if you are not relating with this African in the normal way you should relate, we are both losing, you know, and I think it's important.
We have only 3 minutes. I was reading an article about yesterday. This suffering, this torture in Libya, the Europeans are trying to use it as a deterrent, that don't try to come to this place, whether you are in Africa or in Libya. I don't think it works. If you talk to the young people in Africa today, if you tell them about this slave trade, they don't care. They will cross over. In closing, would it be a deterrent?
Well, I am going to give you a simple example. In the United States, they've been talking, Mexico has been a case study of this. They've been deporting Mexicans and torturing them and using this strategy, but they go back and come back, so that won't work. It might work in the short run, but it cannot work in the long run. So we need to empower these people. We need to teach them. And Africans in Boston, and the march we had today, we are going to come up together as one and educate Africans. We're going to take the further step in seeing how we can create programs together that would benefit Africans, that would help them to understand the importance of living in Africa. And we're also going to support them, promote innovation, creativity in them. So this march today was just a first step. We are bringing now, rolling a package out that we're going to work with head of states as well, inclusive, including the United States, because when they migrate, they become a burden to the United States. They're already a burden in Europe. Italians are marching on the street, asking that they go back to their country. Britain is crying out. Everyone is crying. Spain is a disaster. So it's a universal problem. And we are willing to come up, to work together with every stakeholder, because the solution would benefit everyone alike. So I would leave it here and I'll let Trish you.
Briefly. We want to work in partnership with corporate heads. We want to work with politicians, heads of states, people who are influential, and being able to join with us and young people and old people around the issues of Africa, but the issues of migration in the first place, and come up with solutions that are workable and that are efficient. Putting people back to work with dignity.
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me your precious time discussing the slave trade in Libya. Rahman, as a movie producer, we're going to meet and discuss about the future of documentary making in Libya. You have been watching the magnificent African television network of New England. Thank you for watching. Ahlan wa sahlan and arrivederci.
ዓለም ዓለም ምን ይመስልሻል? ሰው ሁሉ ታዝቦሻል። ስመ ጠቅላላ ዓለም መልከ ብዙ ሁሉም ተሸክመሽ ኖሮ ከነጓዙ ከወዲያ ከወዲህ ስትመላለሽ ስንቱ ሳቅ ብሎ ስንቱ አዘነብሽ ዓለም ዓለም ምን ይመስልሻል? ሰው ሁሉ ታዝቦሻል። ዓለም ነጋዴ ነሽ ሻጭ ነሽ ለሚገዛ ያው ባለውረት ሸቀጥሽ የበዛ አንዱ ሲያመሰግን አንዱ ሲጠላሽ ያዳላል ያሉ ኑሮ ሚዛንሽ ዓለምዬ ምን ይመስልሻል ሰው ሁሉ ታዝቦሻል